Thanks very much for your attention, everyone. Welcome to the next wonderful concurrent. Opening up, we have Bec Nogajski. She is the Executive Director of Medical Services at Western Sydney. She's passionate about addressing health inequality. And on the weekend, she accidentally got her plates wrong, but managed to lift 127 kilos.
Yeah.
She will be talking about nothing to complain about, dealing with disgruntlement. Thank you very much, Bec.
Thank you. I know from the Grace did ask me for a quirky fact, and I am anything but quirky. But I did lift that amount of weight on the weekend, and I'm proud to say my back is still intact. So I was touch and go there for a moment when I realised I couldn't count. Before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting on today, and pay my respects to past, present, any Aboriginal people here today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So, dealing with disgruntlement. I thought I haven't got a clicker. Thank you. So today, what I really want to talk to you about is the number 3. So 3 is a really important number. It's a prime number, it's a triangular number, it's 1 more than 2, and it's 1 less than 4. But it actually is one of the most important numbers that are going around. So, in the wise words of De La Soul, it's the magical number. No one here of that vintage? No, okay, fine. So I know there'd be some people out there, I really do. It's a number of journey, right? Beginning, middle, end, birth, life, death. And it's also one of the most important numbers when it comes to complaint management. I am sorry. 3 words. Very important words. But that's not the only reason why 3 is important. What I've learnt in my job, and I have been incredibly lucky in my journey so far. I have been a doctor in training at one of the largest children's networks. I grew up through the Children's Hospital at Westmead. I've been a senior clinician in the emergency department at both Westmead Children's and Sydney Children's. I was really lucky enough and privileged enough to be head of department at the Kids ED at Westmead. And then I jumped ship 3 years ago, that number again, number 3, and I went over to be the Director of Paediatrics in Western Sydney. And then lo and behold, I've ended up being the Executive Director of Medical Services. My husband's not overly impressed with that job, but it is a great job. But throughout those stages of my journey, I have been involved in complaint management, whether it was as a junior doctor, and I remember this complaint, and I remember being defensive because it wasn't about me, it was about the registrar before that didn't do their job, right? I remember being that person, and I remember being the head of department reading through complaints about care that we had failed to deliver on the standards that we should be doing. People who didn't get pain relief. People who were sort of held down while we, this is perception, but while we administered nitrous but didn't give enough pain relief on the side. All these things came to my door as head of department. And then as Director of Paediatrics, I had to sit in a room with people I did not know and had nothing to do with the care, but help openly disclose and actually go through complaints with people. And now as the Executive Director of Medical Services, I'm at the pointy end of the triangle, 3 again, where I'm the decision maker, and I have to make decisions on investigations about my colleagues and what is the next steps with that. So over the next sort of 15 minutes, what I really want to take you through is a journey of 3. And like any good story, there's a beginning, middle and an end, but you also always have 3 choices, right? There's 3 obstacles to overcome, you have to do 3 tasks. So we're going to talk about complaint management and also the lessons I've learnt, but we're going to go through receiving the complaint, processing the complaint, and resolving the complaint. So why do we do this? We seek feedback all the time. We have complaint managers, we have social media websites, we say, have your say, we give you all the avenues in the world. And I would say everyone in here, I reckon at some point, has been involved in some form of complaint process. So whether that's at triage, when you've got someone coming and saying we've waited 10 hours to be seen, or a nurse unit manager about a nurse who maybe didn't respond to the call bell enough, we've all had, touched the complaint line. However, it is so, so important. Feedback is so important because it actually lets us develop our systems in which we work for the better. We want feedback all the time, we constantly crave it. But this is a way that we can actually pause and go, are we doing a good job? Interestingly enough, complaints don't always match up to an incident. So you'll get some complaints about things you never knew were happening, or near misses that we never knew. So this is actually the most important opportunity we have is complaint management, and it's incredibly important that we get it right. So in a study around 2013, looking at 11 years of complaints that meet the pointy end, so ones that go to the Healthcare Ombudsman, in all states of Australia, bar South Australia, I don't quite know why South Australia got left out, but they didn't choose to join, there was 18,907 complaints made. That's a lot. That's not everyday complaints. These are the ones that actually make it, to the top. Interestingly, 3% of the medical workforce accounted for 50% of those complaints. Oh yes. I know, right? 3%, 50%, that's a lot. So we know what people complain about. If I asked you what do people complain about, what would you tell me? Communication and wait times, yes, all about the wait times, and the aspects of their care. So whether it's medication, whether it's access to, like I've been put on the wait list for my surgery and it's 2 years, or I can't get an outpatient appointment, or the medication was wrong, or the diagnosis was wrong, or that doctor was rude, that nurse was dismissive. Like, we know what people complain about. And now we also know that 3% of us, of our colleagues, make up for 50% of the really serious complaints. Yeah, I know, right? I was like, oh my goodness, that's actually quite significant. So what we're going to do now is begin our journey, right? So we're stepping up and we're looking at we're at the fork in the road, 3, and we're going down the first path. So this is receiving the complaint. And again, there's actually 3 things. There's only 3 things that we need to do at this point to start off well, because this is the start of our journey with the patient or the family or whoever it is that's complaining, or it might even be a colleague. But how do we partner with them? How do we actually get the most out of them? How do we get that feedback? So first of all, you have to acknowledge the complaint has been received. And this may sound really simple, this step, and the next 2 steps as well, but I can tell you it's something we don't do very well. So when an email comes in about a complaint, the best thing to do is just say, acknowledging your complaint, acknowledging your email. I acknowledge receipt of this. So the person on the other end knows that actually that hearing, that listening is starting now. And this is the next step that we don't do very well, is set timelines and expectations. And we have to stick to them, because if you don't stick to them, the trust is broken. So these first steps are so important with the partnership moving forward and the process. So acknowledge, say thank you very much, I'll get back to you in 2 days, or HR will get back to you in 2 days, we've received your complaint. And the next step is to listen. So when my flight coming here yesterday was cancelled at 2:22 in the morning by Virgin sending me a text, and all I wanted to do was complain, which I reined it in a little bit but couldn't quite help myself when I got to the counter of the check-in of my rescheduled flight. All I wanted to do was vent. That's all I wanted to do. And there was a solution, right? I was here, I'd rebooked and all the rest of it, I wanted to vent. So remember that, put yourself in the patient's shoes, and sometimes you just have to listen. Sometimes you have to, after so long, you have to actually redirect them to why they've actually called or what they actually want to speak about, but you do have to listen, because you need to know what they are seeking. It's exactly the same when we see a patient through the emergency department or an outpatient clinic. If you think you know what the problem is, and you haven't addressed their problem, they'll represent. So if we don't listen to what they actually want resolved, and you don't understand that, this will not go anywhere. So it's the listening, it's the active listening, and it's actually closing the loop back and saying back, this is what I understand you are asking of me. And then we close the loop. So the closing the loop is simple. This is what I understand you are upset about. I'm sorry this has happened, or I'm sorry about that, apologise, whatever needs to happen. And then you go, the next steps are this. So it might be easily resolved at this point, very easy. It might be like, actually, yes, totally agree, we shouldn't have given you the wrong discharge paperwork. We're going to do this. Here's your new discharge paper. We'll be in contact in 5 days' time to follow up X, Y, and Z. But again, it's all about closing the loop, expectations, timelines, and meeting it. We have all been that person who thinks they can pull that Jenga piece out and not make it topple. Sometimes our risk assessment is not very good. So the next part of this journey is I want you to think of Jenga, and I want you to think, what is the process? So risk assessment is something we do every day. We send people home every day. We triage them, we send people home, we give them appointments in advance, we say you can have your surgery in 6 months. We risk assess every day. However, when it comes to complaints, sometimes we just drop all common sense and get caught up in the emotion. And this happened to me yesterday when I was waiting for the plane. Someone rings me and goes, oh my goodness, this clinician's made a complaint about this clinician, it's a witch hunt, it's this, it's that. And it's actually just take the emotion out of it and let's assess the risk. So how do you assess risk of complaints? It's the same thing. It's what's the consequence of the risk and what's the likelihood of it happening again. Now everyone should have, and this is where I become the true medical administrator that I now am, every place you work should have a complaints management policy. And the health district that you work for as well, like New South Wales Health or Victoria Health, will also have an overarching policy that it's based on. So in there they will have a risk assessment chart. So you can actually work out what is the risk of this complaint. And it's the same as incident management. If it's really significant, act immediately. What are you going to do? Who does it need to be escalated to? And if it's low risk, it's like, well, that can go back down to the department to be worked through. Risk assessment's really important. If a clinician is involved, you have to risk assess that. And this is where it gets difficult. How do you risk assess? So, is it deliberate? Did they deliberately mean to cause harm? Are they incapacitated? Do they have a medical problem? Was there something wrong that they didn't foresee? Did they follow policy and procedure? Were policy and procedures actually in place and correct? Or actually, did we support them? Is it a systems issue? Is there supervision, training and all the rest of it that you need to do? So that needs to happen in parallel, because the clinician will need to be managed as well as the complaint. And if the risk about the clinician is high, like stealing a script pad, writing scripts, getting the person to fill the script but then taking half of the medication themselves or whatever else, you have to manage that risk as well. And that can be very difficult. And so this is when I say you need to become best friends with your HR department, because they will step you through every step of the way with this and involve senior clinicians. So you've assessed the risk. You then gather information. And this is important as well. The who, the what, the where, the why. You're not making any decisions, but you want who's involved, what doctors were involved, what does it look like? And then you decide, are you going to investigate? And what does that investigation look like? So again, 3 steps along the journey. Investigation is incredibly important. You need to ensure that you've got the right people in the room, you know exactly what you're investigating, what are the rules around investigations, do you need someone external, and the timeline. 60 days, so 3 lots of 20, is when investigations should be complete. As a clinician, that's a very long time to have something hanging over your head, to be investigated, formally investigated. You may be still working, you may have some restrictions, you may not, you may be stood down with pay, who knows, it all depends. But 60 days is an incredibly long time. So you have to ensure, and I can tell you, most investigations do not take 60 days, they take longer. So we need to ensure that we have communication with all parties, updating and support for that clinician as well. Because the opportunity is actually, do we need to develop the clinician? Do we need to support the clinician? Or is this clinician one of the 3%? And then we come to the end. And the end is the resolution. And sometimes we feel we can come at the resolution at the beginning because we may not have listened, or we do know because we know it's going to be about communication or this or that or whatever. But the resolution at the end is when you give the findings back to the person who's complained, and also the person who may be under investigation, which is slightly different. But you give the findings back. So this is where you need to have clear communication. You need to sit down with them and go through it step by step. You also then need to action what you have said you will do. And this is really important. The policies need to change. Do medication rooms need to be changed? Is there other things that need to be changed? And they all have to be actioned. And then the third one, which we do not do well, is how do we record it? How do we know what we have done? And that is actually part of the key learnings that we need to bring back. Because if you haven't recorded it and you haven't written it down, then it never happened. And there is always an appeals process, right? The truth is in between. There's my side of the story, your side of the story, and the truth is in the middle. So is that it? Is that all there is to complaint management? Are we all happy to go out and buddy up with your HR department and go, let's go forth and change the world? Yes. You get a car. Thank you very much. But is it? Like, is it really that simple? Because that is basically complaint management. Yet who in the room feels that we do it well? Anyone? So what I really want to remember is, what about the clinician? So for me, when I make decisions now, it's really tough, right? How do I know the 3%? And could I have predicted one of those people in the 3%? Where did we fail? Like, this might be a doctor that's been underperforming for many years, but then it may not have been. So how do we actually stop, get in and support that person? Because what's the first thing that happens if you have a complaint or a colleague has a complaint about them? We go to our medical indemnity and we get a lawyer, and then it's lawyers at 20 paces, because it's confronting and it's difficult. And you're allowed to do that. That is not what I'm saying. Like, medical indemnity is amazing and everyone should have it for this very reason. But it does then start to change the narrative. So you have to remember, when you've got clinicians that are undergoing an investigative process, how are you supporting them? Because that relationship is still very important. And what support do they need, and what does that look like, and how are we communicating even through layers of lawyers? 97% of doctors who get a complaint find it extremely stressful. I don't know about the other 3%. I think they're just like, I'm about to say, I don't know who they are, but it is incredibly, incredibly stressful. And we have to know, because if you were actually one of those 3%, like if I'm in that 3%, my risk of actually, if I've had 3 complaints about me at that level, in the next year, there's a 60% chance I'm going to have another complaint. So what do we do? How do we manage these people? How do we support them? Like, how do we get them off that path if that's what needs to be had? Or how do we have those difficult conversations around performance? That is very, really important, and we need to do that better. So when I was given this talk by Tess, I did go, this is really dry, right? This is one of the driest talks I will ever give. But I actually went, it's an amazing opportunity, because complaints are the things that we don't yet know about, right? They're the near misses, or they are the incidents that we may not have yet actually found about, and that is why we do our job. So apart from being an amazing opportunity, the lessons that I have learnt that I would actually really encourage people to think about when they deal with complaints would be, how do we communicate? How do we partner with people? How do we support people? How do we actually stick to our timelines? How do we actually, be accountable for what we say we're going to do? Because this is actually incredibly stressful and very important. The other thing, number 2, is that the obstacle is the path. There is so much emotion tied up in some complaints, and you often know the people that are being complained about. You have to make it fair and transparent to everyone involved. You need to follow the procedure. And this is not just the medical administrator involved with me, but you need to go back and actually review the procedure and follow the procedure through. That gives the clinicians fairness and transparency about how they're being investigated and what is actually happening, and it actually then allows complaints to be closed off appropriately. And the third one is you have to look after yourself. Whatever part you play in this, it is stressful. And if you start to become the person who's making the decision or doing open disclosures and all those things, you have to know what do you need to make sure that you are turning up and making the right decision with all the facts. And always remember that there are always 3 sides to every story: yours, theirs, and the truth. Thank you.
Wow, Bec, that was a fantastic talk, and I haven't heard someone talk about complaint systems in such an engaging way. Our lovely Becky is going to go around with a roving microphone, and we've already got a question coming up.
Thanks so much for that. Fraser Maxwell, I'm part of the Kiwi contingent. One of the joys of my professional life is communication. And one of the great distressing things is in complaint process when the complaint's typically been about the system rather than about an individual, and you've had some input into that patient, so your input's required, and you read the complaint and your heart just sags because all you really want to do is go and sit down with that family and say, look, I can see where the issues are, you're barking up the wrong tree, actually the thing you should be thinking about is this, this and this. But actually the complaint process doesn't allow you to interact with the complainee. Do you have words of wisdom for us?
Okay, that's a great question. I think it's exactly right, and I think it is the further up I've gone, the more I can see what you're saying, because I think sometimes you go, if only there'd been a conversation at the very beginning, if only we'd actually sat down in a room and gone and spoke it through. So I think sometimes complaints, and a lot of the complaints that are, because I forgot to say, they can come from the bottom up, but they can also come from the top down. So you know nothing about this at all at our local level, and they can complain to your local minister, and it will flick up and come down. It will come down through CE, through me, through the DMS, back down to the departmental clinician. And you do sometimes have to pause and go, actually, if we'd have just had a conversation, we could have talked about this and then realised this is actually the problem. And that can be part of mediation, so reconciliation, so you can have that opportunity. And I think part of it lies, for me, is in trust, to have that conversation with the people who are complaining. If you don't have that trust at all levels, whether it be departmental, executive or whatever, then those conversations aren't allowed to be had. And so I think that's where you've got to really be aligned, I suppose, with what are your core values of your district, what are the core values of the executive, and go, actually, yes, have a conversation about it and go, well, why can't we come and have a conversation? And it's always earlier to have that conversation at the beginning, and everyone's much happier than to find out after a year of investigation and everything that this could have been a simple conversation at the beginning. So if we went back to basics and actually went, what are they actually seeking? Like, what are they actually seeking? That often can be the clarifying, and so that's where you sort of have to work with your team to be empowered to have that conversation, because I agree, I think a lot of those things can actually don't have to go through the whole process if we're actually honest and transparent and go, actually, this is what's going on, and not defensive. I'm waiting for the witty. I know.
Hi, Bec, Jess from Sydney. I think I know the answer, but I'd still like to ask the question. The role of lawyers and the legal system in this process, could you make a comment?
In general? Yes, so I'll come up from big picture. So every district will have their own lawyers, okay? So everyone's got their own legal team. So every district will have their own legal team attached to their executive. Medical indemnities will provide you with lawyers. That's what they do. They've got lawyers on retainers, and so they will provide you with legal representation if that's what you want to go down. I think that, and that's okay, and I think you're absolutely 100% allowed to have legal representation. That's not what I'm not saying. They're not your support person. Support people are different than legal representation. It then adds an extra layer because you don't then have those conversations because it's lawyer talking to lawyer. And that then makes things a bit more difficult. And sometimes that process has to play out. Sometimes it does get to that, and that's what needs to happen. But I do find that sometimes it is easier to have the conversations before lawyers get involved, because as soon as they get involved, actually you lose a bit of probably the reason why people are complaining, and you get distracted by the outcome of winning per se.